Well, thank you. And thank y'all to everybody that's joined us this month. I appreciate y'all taking a few minutes out to sit in for developing tactical decision games with my friend Mike Walker. We'll go through introductions in a minute. But just kind of real quick, developing tactical decision games. It's a program I've been working with for a couple of years now, teaching at FDIC in a workshop. And a lot of you may have heard some of this terminology that we're going to talk about today: recognition, prime decision making, and situational awareness. But we're going to talk about how do you actually build it into your training programs. And from a volunteer background all the way up into a large metropolitan fire academy, we've found where we can implement different styles and different methods to emphasize that recognition, prime decision making, and situational awareness, so that our training is more realistic and it gives us a better shot at being successful on any emergency scene, not just a fire ground. So that's some of the things we'll talk about. We'll also talk about how we make decisions mentally. How does your brain run through and make selections, and how do you know what the right call is based on what you're pulling up at? So we'll talk about some of that brain functionality piece of it also. But again, thank y'all for joining us. Like Jamie said, we'll definitely have a few minutes at the end to answer any questions. But feel free to put them in the chat box, and if I see it and it flows into what we're talking about, then we'll go ahead and answer it. But we'll definitely save some time at the end to answer any questions. Again, thank y'all for joining. As Jamie said, my name's Brian Wood. My kind of background is everything. I started out at a one-station volunteer department to working up into the metropolitan Atlanta area with Gwinnett County, and then since 2011, started doing industrial emergency operations for Georgia Pacific. And one of the things that I found is that regardless of that background, regardless if it's at the one-station volunteer, whether it's at the formal training academy with Gwinnett, or in the industrial emergency operations section, the things that we'll talk about today apply to every one of them. And you can implement them into any one of them the backgrounds. So that's kind of my background, everything from volunteer to the metropolitan. And then Mr. Mike Walker here. This is kind of funny how we met for this particular conversation. We were both out at Tulsa State Fire School teaching a couple of weeks ago, and we were teaching on similar topics. And we didn't get a whole lot of time to talk, but we met up for a few minutes, and all of a sudden the conversation just flowed into the topics that we were teaching about: decision making, recognition, prime decision making. Gary Klein, who's a research developer that started in the military, developing some of this, and the conversation just took off. And I thought this would be a great opportunity to get back together with Mike and finish up our conversation, sort of. But Mike, you want to give us your little background on you?
Sure. Thanks for having me on the show, Brian. And I've been with Oklahoma City Fire Department for 27 years. I'm a battalion chief with the department now. I'm stationed downtown Oklahoma City in 601 district. I've been a battalion chief coming up on 10 years. I've been an instructor on various levels, even within our own academy or teaching around different classes and different venues for around 20 years. Where I got introduced to the rapid prime decision making, I'd heard it like most of our listeners had heard the term over and over and over again. And it was when it was after I was promoted to chief that it became something that I realized that I had some deficiencies in that I needed to come up with ways to improve my ability to recognize certain situations, improve my situational awareness. And so that's where my whole class derived from in my research on the subject matter.
Awesome. Well, that kind of goes into the next piece of this. And I think when you talk about situational awareness and recognition, prime decision making, you need to understand some of the historical background or why it was developed, how it was developed, so you understand how you can implement it into your training programs. So for me, it was probably 2011. I got up to the training academy and got started recognizing that, well, there's other ways of doing stuff and being able to better your decision making capabilities. But then they gave me this program and got a part of acting officer, acting captain, and so forth. And if you're going to train people, you want to know the best way to train them. You want them to remember, the situations and the training drills that you're doing. So a mentor of mine, David Rhodes from the city of Atlanta, he started sending me this information on this guy named Gary Klein, and he started I started reading a lot of this materials. And basically, for Gary, he was hired in the military as a private contractor back in like the 80s. And he started, they asked him, how do we develop our soldiers without shooting live rounds at each other? Because one, it hurts when you get hit, and then two, it's expensive. So how do we make training realistic, but not actually shooting bullets at each other? So he started looking through the, where can I gain evidence? He's a researcher. Where can I gain evidence to learn how people make decisions? So he found some of the busiest fire companies around the country and rode with them. And what that allowed him to do was, as they caught the call, he'd jump on ride tailboard. He'd go out there. He'd see the actual incident commander in action. He watched the scene, and then he would go back and he could actually critique and say, well, why did you do this? How did you think about that? What made you make this decision? And there's a couple of things that they found out, and some of it is, regardless of right or wrong, the first decision that comes to your brain that matches what you think is correct is what you go with. All of us know you don't run out to the fire or any emergency scene with a checklist, and as the house is burning down, go, yeah, that's there, smoke's there, fuel's there. It's what comes to mind. Mike, what do you think about that?
Well, obviously, it's correct what he came up with. In the question I found myself in, or quandary, was it happened on my first multi-alarm fire after I'd made chief, and I had commanded fires before when I was riding up or whenever, just as the first arriving officer, but I got to a point on this incident for whatever reason. There wasn't any, babies hanging out the windows. There wasn't anything, threats to the firefighters or anything like that. But when I called for the third alarm, they said, where do you want your level 2 staging area to be at? Which is typical wastewater dispatchers do. And for just a few moments, I kind of felt like I locked up, and I couldn't understand why I couldn't get to that point of making a decision of just saying simply, I wanted to be on 63rd Street. And so again, that brought me back into the decision making. And what I kind of discovered is that I couldn't find the way they asked it. And when I was faced on that scene, it was a new situation for my brain, and that it couldn't recognize something that, even though my practicing for, my assessment centers and the fires that I'd been on before, and it kind of got me, there's the fight and flight. Well, I kind of discovered that night there's definitely the freeze that goes along with it, the proverbial deer in the headlight. And so it's one of those that you latch onto that first decision. Okay, so how do you make that first decision the most appropriate decision? And, that's, as training officers, that's what we're looking for, is to get it to where those mental slides that we've referred to over the years. Well, how do you get that to be a crisp, clear slide? How do you make it where you recognize multiple variables going along with, the decision making? Because as you said, the first decision that pops in, you recognize the patterns of what you're seeing in front of you. You categorize it once you recognize those patterns, and then you start running through your scenario of how you're going to fix it. And the first one that pops up, that'll get me from point A to point B, that's what we're going with. And so the challenge is to make sure that decision, or increase the likelihood that decision that pops up is not just a decision, but it's actually a good decision.
Right, and I agree with you. When I do this class, a lot of times I'll bring a dice in there, and I call it the gambler's fallacy. And so when you pull up on any scene, how many different options do you have? And if you're specifically talking about a structure fire, you got offensive, defensive, transitional, investigating, straight going into a rescue. So you got all these different modes you can go with. How do you know which one is the right one for that particular call? And it's going back to that first thing that pops in your brain. And that was one of the things that Gary Klein found out was when he asked him, he said, well, how did you know that was the right decision? A lot of times they said, I don't know. It was over training and experience. They developed these slide trays, as you mentioned, and they just knew there were similarities, but they didn't know how to explain that. That they were to pick out and say, all right, this is the right mode of action for this call. So that was one piece of it. Kind of want to talk about situational awareness for a second and how that drives your recognition prime decision making. So for me, with situational awareness, you really have three modes. It's identify, comprehend, and predict. Is how I like to frame it up. One is you got to be able to understand that, hey, there is something there. You have smoke, okay? Well, then if what do you comprehend about that smoke? Do you understand the turbulence, the velocity, the smoke, the color characteristics? And then you got to be able to predict, well, where's that smoke traveling based on the particular situation that you have. So one of the things that I ask my students, or when I teach this class, is think about how you can make students have to pick up on these little, what we call cues and clues, so that they have to understand and have to actively think about, make a decision about where that smoke's going to travel and how they're going to handle it. I really believe that your situational awareness is a practice skill, and that capability drives your ability to make decisions and make the correct decisions. Does that kind of follow what you think, Mike?
Yeah, there's and Klein will refer to the difference between the novice and the expert throughout his work. And other people that do similar research will use similar types of terms, but just for the sake of we'll just use novice and expert. When you talk about the identify portion of it, to the novice, they see smoke. All right, they learned what smoke was when they were relatively young, but as they increase their understanding, all right, that information goes along with the term smoke. It's even though when we speak in a linear fashion, and we think that our brain works like we're reading a book, and that's not actually accurate. Like if you were a common term, whether it be smoke or if I say the word dog, your brain automatically has access to all of that information. What is the essence of smoke? What is the essence of dog? If I use that term, you think of every single dog you've had, the first dog you've had, how they smell, how they act, what they eat, what they like. And that information is automatically, instantaneously there. But you have to feed it. It doesn't come easy. And it comes with those, it's really nothing new, but a lot of hard work and study. And then the other thing, like when you said the identify, comprehend, and predict, with that is to be able to comprehend what we sometimes tend to do is we will study a topic in one realm, whether it be reading, or going to lectures, or whatever it is, and so that's over in one part of our brain, and then we see something else and it's over in another part, and it's almost like they're separated. What we've got to do to hit that expertise is that all of this information in different ways that we're gathering is that it comes together to where whenever we have that situation where we need to comprehend all of the information in its entirety, it's going to increase the accuracy of our prediction. And Klein gives that example of the NICU nurses in his book. I think it's The Power of Intuition. When he was talking about the nurse that had been in the NICU unit for several years versus it was an experienced nurse, but she was new to the NICU unit. And they had the infant that there wasn't anything of itself that was apparent that was wrong with the child. She was just a little less fussy. The heel stick bled just a little bit more. Her color was just a little bit off. Her temperature was just a little bit below normal. Well, to the novice, they see the individual pieces, but they don't necessarily come together. where when the experienced or the expert sees something, they take all of this information and they comprehend it, not separately, but more in a cloud-based, a holistic point of view, where what he was able to find out from his research when he studied them is that these experienced NICU nurses were diagnosing serious medical problems hours and sometimes even days before the best medical tests could find. And like the infant in the example that I'm giving, the baby was septic. Well, you say, well, one time's luck. Well, it kept happening over and over and over again. And he tied in, you have your fireground commanders where they weren't really sure what was driving their decisions. The same thing with those neonatal intensive care unit nurses. They just realized, well, I just know, because the experience is the big key, because they were able to take all of this information, even though to a novice, again, they're very separated. As we gain in our levels of experience, those things become more integrated with each other. So that's the way I see it.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I agree with you. And that novice and expert, I think there's how I typically explain it is, for the novice, A means B, B means C, C to D. There's that linear path you're talking about. But when you get to that expert stage, you may see A, you don't know where B is, it hasn't shown itself, but you see C and you're able to adapt. Your mind physiologically adapts to the situation you're faced with. And it kind of goes to, well, no two fire calls or no two accidents or anything or incidents that we run are ever the same, but we're able to adapt to the situation that we come up upon based on that previous experience, training, and so forth. I was introduced to this concept very early on, but I didn't know what it was. And what I mean by that is I was probably a 2-year guy, and I was riding on a med unit and I had a medic with me, probably had 15, 17 years of experience, and we got paged out to a 29-year-old with chest pain. Most of us, 29 years old with chest pain, nothing reported, as family history or any indicators like that. Most of us think 29 years old, indigestion, something else is going on, overexertion, anxiety, so forth. So we get toned out. We pull up in the driveway, and I vividly remember walking in. I got the O2 caddy and the jump bag, and as soon as we open the door, this gentleman's laying on the floor, kind of clutching his chest, and paramedic said, "Grab him and go. He's having an MI." And I'm like, "What? What are you talking about? How do you know that?" And I had just figured out how to get good at 12 leads. So I was like, "Hey man, let me try to see the little squiggly lines on the monitor." And he's like, "No, we don't have time. Get them and go." So we packaged them, got them up, got them into the back of the ambulance. Didn't even let the EMT do a IV stick, right? It was that expedient. He was like, "Just get and go." We wound up going to the hospital several times later that night and found out that the individual was actively having an MI. And I was like, "Wow, Matt, you're pretty smart." Forgot about it. A couple of years went by. Started working on this this research with the recognition prime decision making, and this call stuck with me over all these years. And I called Matt up one day and I said, "Matt, how did you know that was really what was going on?" And kind of like the fireground commanders, Matt, one, he didn't even remember the call. So I had to recreate it for him. But then he said, there's nothing that one single particular thing, like you mentioned with the NICU nurses, led him to make that decision. It was just the signs and symptoms of seeing other individuals that, if we would have made that a 60-year-old patient with chest pains, it would have made a lot more sense. But he took the previous training and the experiences of the calls that he's ran, and he said it just all kind of came together for the presentation of how that individual's face was grimacing, how he was clutching his chest. And he couldn't point to one particular thing that said, "This is why I made that call." It was just looking at it in the grand scheme or the realm of everything at once, and how you talked about it overlaying each other. And he said it just made sense. And he said, he did have to remove kind of the age part of it, and think, all right, I've seen this before. just in a different patient, in a different age group. So that was kind of how he made the decisions. And I thought it was really unique when we discussed that. But that's part of being able to make them decisions, and the difference between the expert and the novice, and really gets into being able to adapt to the situation that you're faced with. So we kind of briefly touched on some of the training aspects. With training for the novices, generally we look at it as law. I call it law of association. We go from, and we teach them in that linear way that we were talking about earlier. You start with the basics and you bring them up, right? And that makes sense. That makes 100% sense, especially when you're introducing new materials. But I think one of the things that we have to open ourselves up to as company officers in the station, or whether you're at the training academy as an instructor, is how do you start making individuals make decisions even at the basic level? So, not me telling you to go grab a tool, but are you making a decision to grab the tool? And sometimes we have to change up how we're given the opportunities, so that we don't have to tell them everything to do, but we give them that opportunity to make a decision about grabbing a tool or making doing a right-hand search or whatever it may be. What are your thoughts, Mike, on how to train differently from the novice to bring up to the expert?
That as Klein, he always refers things that this is how a novice looks at it, and this is how an expert looks at it. Well, as we have a definite need to get our personnel from the novice up to that level where they have a decent enough competency to be able to make consistent decisions that are accurate. And so, are there ways that we can deliberately train people, or is it just going to happen, kind of by happenstance, for lack of a better word? And that's what caused me to understand the work by Anders Ericsson, and he wrote a book called Peak. And Dr. Ericsson, there's a whole field of study on this, come to find out, about how people achieve high levels of success and actually, and to use the words that we're using, to reach that level of expertise. And the term that he uses is deliberate practice. There's also another book, it's called The Talent Code. Let me look at this up real quick. Because I don't want to say by Daniel. Oh, sorry.
But one of the other books, for anybody that's looking,
by Daniel Coy, and he talks about deep practice, but both are the same thing. It's practicing something the right way. And the article that you wrote about your tactical decision games, you don't explicitly talk about it, but the elements are there. Is that you give them there's a goal in mind. They know what it's supposed to look like. There's a prototype, as Klein will say, is that, this is what correct is. This is what you want to strive to become. And you give them incremental steps to take, because if you try to make them understand the whole concept, they don't understand the details, because even though the expert doesn't consciously consider the minutia, the smaller steps, they are still there, and they have been considered in a matter of microseconds. So as the training officer or the company officer who's coaching this person, and I think it's an appropriate word, is to, you're the coach there, is you're not just providing information, but you're also giving correction when it's needed. As that student, you do the whiteboard exercise, or you do the one that you're using, Fire Studio or one of the other, digital combustion, whatever program you're using. When they go through it, we have a tendency to not want to hurt their feelings. Say, oh, you did good job. But we also have an obligation to say, hey, you did pretty good, but you did miss this point, and you did miss that, and to coach them into those appropriate and right steps. Because it's just like when we're teaching someone how to play ball, we're going to teach them how to play baseball, or we're going to teach them how to swing a golf club, or we're going to teach them something like that, we don't hesitate by letting them know, well, you're slicing because you're doing this, your grip's wrong, you're pulling your head up, or whatever. Well, we need to realize that those same needs are there when we're coaching our younger firefighters on how to make tactical decisions, and to get them and to point out to them, did you see this? Did you understand that? Just ask them, do you understand why I made that decision? Now, again, for us as the experienced ones, that's going to be a bit of a challenge. And sometimes we don't realize the significance of the decisions that we make, again, because it's no big deal to us now. Well, and we may not even consciously remember, like you gave the example of the heart attack. Well, you've had hundreds of experiences that made an impression on you, that hit the limbic portion of your brain because of the emotion and the stress, that it locked in a memory, that it's there. It's something very important that your brain remembers, but it's intuitively. So you're hitting it on a subconscious level. So we've got to break down as much of that as we can in the conscious level, because they need that checklist in the beginning. They need those breadcrumbs, that path to follow. And the more we run them through those, then they'll start gaining the experience as they practice those steps.
Absolutely. And I think it's also part of how we actually do our training. So I'll be the first one to raise my hand. There was a point in my career where we was going to do training, but you know what? Let's wait till it gets about 70 degrees. Let's get a little light wind blowing. Let's make sure my food's digested after lunch. Then we'll go out and do the training. And we'll do it one time. And if I get it right, then that's it. But that is wrong. That is so completely wrong. And I call it mastery beyond perfection. It's being able to do it over and over and over and over until you cannot get it wrong. And I use an example from the Navy SEALs. 2012, we had 2 American hostages that were over in Somalia, held hostage by Somalian pirates. They were missionaries. One of the individuals was a lady. She started having some medical issues, and they ordered Navy SEALs to go get them. Now, to get the backstory on this, you got to kind of back up to 2010. The rotation that they go through is basically 18 months of training, 6 months deployment. And so I asked the class, in 2010, do you think that SEAL Team 6 knew exactly what call they was going to run in 2012? Obviously, no. This had only been going on for 3 months. So when you get on the engine today, do you know what call you're going to run? None of us do. So we have to prepare, knowing our team members, knowing the strengths, developing the weaknesses, so that we can all complement each other. I had a conversation earlier today, and they talked about the Swiss cheese model. We're all humans. There's all imperfections in all of us. Even if you're the most studious firefighter there is, what we have to do is to make sure we put enough protections in place, whether it's training, education, developing our team together to work as a team, so that Swiss cheese model, the holes don't line up, because that's when accidents and injuries occur. So that SEAL team, they came together, 18 months of training. They're out there working every single day. So they get the call, go overseas to Somalia. They're going to rescue these 2 American hostages. Go out into the ocean to get dropped off, track in a couple miles through the jungle. It's in the cover of night, so forth. I had no doubt they had recon. They had some intel about how many pirates there were, probably weapon types, probably, obviously location, whole 9 yards. But were there unknowns? Can anybody predict what's going through somebody that's, their minds, what that pirate might have thought? Somebody that's anxious and nervous, that's even more dangerous than, somebody that's calm. So they go in there, they see the campsite, they break the barrier of cover, and I use this, what I call implicit communication. They've trained so much together that they can watch the actions of each person, and that's how they communicate versus going out and verbally communicating. They break the barrier of cover, shots are fired, both sides. In the end, there's 9 dead pirates, 2 American hostages and 0 SEAL team injuries. And my question is that a mistake? Was that luck on their part? Or did they prepare, plan, and they got past the novice level to the expert level, to where they performed to a level that wasn't just hoping to get it right. It wasn't being accidentally successful. It was actually executing to the point where it was perfection. So how do we do that in the stations on the fire ground? And that's one of the things that we're going into next, is being able to implement them different pieces of, instead of waiting until after lunch when it's 70 degrees with a light wind blowing and so forth. All right, go out there in full turnout gear, throw the ladder. All right, break it down, throw it again. Break it down, throw it again. And it's getting to the point to where you're building muscle memory, you're adapting to the situation, and being prepared. And one of the things that you, by training over and over and over, is that every once in a while, the ladder gods throw you or whatever you're training with, they throw you a nugget because something happens that you didn't prepare for it to happen, even on the perfect days. And you go, wow, now what if that would have happened on the fire ground? What would I have done? Well, you just covered it in the back of the station, and you got a chance to play with it and figure out, what works, what doesn't work. Any ideas, Mike, or things that you've done or seen to kind of help that at the station level?
Yeah, the memory is tied to emotion, and it's also tied to levels of stress. So if we think of it, going on, again off of what your example is making sure that we, or as the old coach says, we practice like we play, or we play like we practice. And it's not practice makes perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. And there's a lot of science that backs that up. That we have to get people to the point that they reach a level of unconscious consciousness or competence. Going back to Noel Birch, who first introduced that model, where you go through the 4 levels of competence, where you are unconsciously incompetent. You don't know what you don't know. It's kind of like how you were before you learned how to drive. You thought you knew you were going to know how to drive. You thought it was going to be simple until you started doing it. And as soon as you started practicing how to drive, you quickly became consciously incompetent. You knew you didn't have any idea what you were doing. Same thing as the recruit, when they start recruit class and they think they know what it's going to take to be a good firefighter. And we start putting them through bunk out drills, and they realize they're not even close to being what they should be. But they start practicing. And then as they go from unconscious competence to a conscious competence, that if they apply a whole lot of brain power and they apply all of their conscious ability, they can succeed more times than they fail. But it requires a lot of conscious thought. So, the example that I'll use often is, if you think about when you were learning how to drive a car, first time you backed out of the driveway, it was stressful. It wasn't easy to do. You had to adjust the mirror. You made sure your seatbelt was on. Nobody could talk. The radio couldn't be on, because you took all of your conscious effort to be able to succeed at getting the car backed out of the driveway. Well, you've done that enough times. Well, now think about what it's like whenever you're driving you're backing your car out of the driveway. You probably don't even look out the mirror. You're talking on the phone. The radio's talking. The kids are gabbing away in the back seat. All right. You may even be using your knee on the steering wheel. There's no telling what it is, but your level of success is 100%, and you don't even have to give it any conscious thought. So you've hit that 4th level of unconscious competence, which is extremely important. The aspect for us is we have to understand is that there's different levels of competence. And what we've been striving for, and what we're the theme of this message is that we have to hit that high level of performance. That level of expert. The SEAL Team 6, so to speak. And so again, it goes back to what is your prototype? What are you basing your model off of? And that right there becomes a challenge. As a chief, I've never gone into a station and asked a crew or an officer, say, "Hey, how good are you? catching a hydrant or doing a forward lay or doing an offensive attack or throwing ladders. Not once have I ever had an officer say, well, we're horrible. We absolutely stink at this. That doesn't happen. They all say, oh, we're pretty good. Well, the challenge is you're pretty good based off of what? And that's where purposeful and deliberate practice comes into play, and knowing what correct looks like. And, in this day and time, with YouTube and, class availability and information availability like we have now, understanding what the best method is more available now than it ever has been. Erickson talks about in his book, he gives an example that in 1908, the person who won the Olympic marathon, his time was 2 hours and 55 minutes, and it was considered the greatest race. Will never be broken. Oh my goodness, this guy's not even really human. He's so fast. On and on and on. Well, you go into the last Olympics, or the world record now is 2 hours and 2 minutes. So in 99 years, we've dropped 55 minutes in our time. Well, what changed? The humans didn't evolve, that much over 99 years. Well, we learned how to learn. We learned how to practice correctly. The minimum qualifying time in the Boston Marathon now for ages 18 through 34 is 3 hours and 5 minutes. So the guy who won, did a world record, just 99 years ago, isn't much now. I mean, it wouldn't be that exceptional at all. So as we learn how to learn, it should continually improve as time goes on. What we tend to fall into is that we're like the person backing out of our driveway. Well, I'm pretty good at this. Well, that's all you need to do is back out of the driveway. But if you were to make me go drive in a NASCAR race or a Formula One race, I have a pretty good chance I'm not going to do very well, because my comparison is based off of my neighbors instead of a professional elite driver. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So I think that's we got to be able to start thinking about it in some of these terms that you're talking about. And then how do we develop that into our training program? So a couple of the different options that I teach in this particular class, and it goes back to what you mentioned earlier about starting kind of easy and then building up. The neat thing is that 4 of these 5 samples or types that we're going to talk about are basically free. So it doesn't matter. You don't need any money to make this happen. The first one that we talk about is I use the 1-page lesson plan. And all it is I go out and find some pictures, or I find some fire pictures that calls we ran in the past, put them on a piece of paper, and give it a couple of questions, maybe 3 questions, and I give them a time limit. So I develop this together. I understand what the objective is that I want to cover, or what I'm trying to get across, and I slide it in front of the individuals. And this is at the station level. All right, so all I have invested is my time and a piece of paper. And I say, all right, here's what we got. Now we're going to do this 1-page lesson plan, our tactical decision game. I'm going to give you, depending upon novice, expert, what levels we're looking at, 30 seconds. And I want you to look at the picture, answer the 3 questions. Or maybe there's just a little 1 or 2 sentence blurb, just enough to give them a little bit of information to think about. And I say, all right, here we go. And turn them over, time them. Now, everybody knows what, timing does. So if I want to add just a little bit of stress to you, I give you a time limit. And most of the time, we do it to ourselves. Our brains, mentally, when we start thinking about that we put stress on ourselves, one, because of that crunch time, but then also we're pretty competitive. All right, nobody wants to be wrong, so we put that stress on us. So you get your 30 seconds, write down whatever, make your notes, and it's not about, I don't need some 10-page dissertation. It's making sure that you understand what we're talking about. And the point is that if you can't get down at least some notes, or to even think about, use a little introspection. Yeah, I didn't really know what the answer to 1 was, or 2, or whatever it may be. I probably need to go out and look at this or improve upon it. So I put all the pressure on myself. Nobody else put it on, but it made my brain start to get into a little bit more of a stressful situation. And when we add stress, we add realism, and it makes it more vivid for us. But then, as you talked about earlier, we got to make sure we critique it. We got to make sure we critique so that say, hey, you could have improved on this, or did you think about this? Bottom line is if you can't at least think through it at the kitchen table with a piece of paper, and that's all the stress you have to deal with, we won't be able to do it when it gets to the emergency scene or some incident where noise, time crunch is of concern, resource complexity, all of that coming together. So that was one of the very basic and free ones that I encourage everybody to attempt at their station. It is great for looking at expectations. That for me personally, seeing where everybody thinks about it. I've worked for some great company officers, but a lot of times we took it for granted that Joe was just going to do what was right. Well, let's get away from the PowerPoint and the lesson plans. That I'll be honest, it's the same ones I did last year. It's the same ones I did the year before that with compliance training or your annual requirements. This is one way of switching it up, making it more engaging, more involving, and it doesn't cost us anything. So that was one of the ways that I've got it involved at the station level. From a training academy standpoint, you could find a couple of topics that you want your department to cover and send it out to everybody and let them do local critiques, at their station, at their shifts, to help them work through being able to develop as a company. Developing strengths and leveraging your strengths and developing your weaknesses happens right there at that kitchen table. There's so much you can do. With coming up from that, I get into taking your fire engineering magazines or whatever magazine you have. Take the picture on the front cover, write a couple of an objective. Hey, this is what I want to get from it. We're going to talk about building construction, and I'm going to ask these questions, and here's some key notes that I want them to be able to answer. And we make it a game. So, I'll take it. I'll call it rapid fire questions. And just to get people's brain to think in a rapid sequence based upon whatever the objective was. So if we're looking at building construction, well, what type is it? Part of that's understanding, all right, if you got a fire inside of a type 5, well, what's the smoke doing? What's the fire doing? What's the hazard concerns that you have? And making their mind practicing going through that assessment, just like when you get on the fire ground. There's always going to be unknowns. There's always going to be pieces that you kind of have to, I don't want to say guess about, but you have to understand but what that building construction may be. What is the inside look like? Now we have, if you study building construction, you typically know, small windows or kitchen or utility based, 2 stories, generally bedrooms are upstairs, living rooms, things of that nature, dining rooms are downstairs. Yeah, we know some of that. But every once in a while, they change it up on the inside, and you have to make an educated guess, I guess you would say. So how do we build that aspect into some of that rapid assessment? I want to go back for just a second. When you talked about doing that critique, one of the other things that a company officer can do to help to build your recognition, prime decision making, situational awareness is the best training that you can do is on the back of the tailboard after the call.
Yes.
We a lot of times we want to wait till, let's give it a week. Let's let it, let's develop an official document and PowerPoint with pictures, and it will bring everybody back together, and then we'll discuss what happened. That's good, and I'm not saying don't do that. But from a learning standpoint and trying to get down to the nitty gritty of it, doing it right there on the tailboard while you're sweating and tears and dirt and grime is on your face, doing it right then and there is going to be the most valuable learning point any of us can be in, whether it's on the real call or it's during a live training event.
I want to add
Mike,
something.
Anything to add?
Yeah, going along exactly what you're saying. The Army, did a study on they realized, and this is, again, they learned from Klein. They hired Klein. He did the work. And what they understood, and they termed it after action reviews, and they started doing these in the 1970s. So they've got quite a bit of data to draw from, but they realized that the soldier gained 75% more learning from the experience if they did an after action review immediately after the occurrence, whether it was training or an actual event, like you said. And it's real simple how this works. That's the part of the reason why it works, doing these tailboard critiques, as you're calling it, or the Army calls it after action reviews. You ask 4 questions. What did we set out to do? What did we actually do? Why were there differences? And what are we going to learn from it? Because it's not all bad. Sometimes there's a lot of good things that we want to reinforce. And again, to the experienced officer, it may not have been any big deal at all. There may not have been anything remarkable about the call, because to the officer, they've seen it multiple times. But to that novice, to that new firefighter, there's a whole lot of information that can be gleaned from that if we'll just give them the opportunity to talk about it. So that's extremely important to do those after action reviews. Something else I want to bring up is some tactical games. And I know we're getting short on time. One of the things that I've done is you go out and take a bunch of pictures of different buildings in your district, set up a PowerPoint where it shows this building for 5 seconds, and then it goes away, and it just rapid fire, like you're saying. It brings up the next building, then the next building, then the next building, and they've got to tell you what type of construction it is. Just answer that. The other one is, do the reading, smoke, watch the video, and make them answer those 3 questions. Where's the fire? What, how big is the fire? Where's it going to be in the next 2 minutes? Make them identify those flow paths. What is that fire? Is the door open behind it, or is the door closed behind it? And again, and put them under a little bit of stress. And the one that I've incorporated over this last year is making them find survival spots. There's no victims not in that window because it's fully involved with flame, but I can see all the blinds in that window. There's a good chance someone's alive in that one. There's still livable places in there, and trying to get them to build a rescue profile into their size up, and then making them do their size up alongside of the radio report. That's basically a mental checklist for them. Instead of, they don't have to have a piece of paper, but if I can teach them a kind of a script on their on-scene radio report, it helps them kind of go through that checklist and hit those major size up points. So anyway.
Absolutely. That's great stuff. And for people that are out there, one of the things that I use is I'll take YouTube videos and I'll pre-watch them. They don't have to be extremely long, anywhere from 30 seconds to 5-10 minutes. Go ahead and watch it. Go ahead and benchmark where there's certain points of things that you want to point out or objectives. And you can either watch it on YouTube, or I use a video software where I can download it. It's called anyvideoconverter.com. And I can take it, download it off YouTube, put it into a WMB file or any file for that software. And we can watch it at the station. And what I'll do is I'll say, all right, let's practice the making decisions. Let's practice situation awareness. I'll play, let's say, 30 seconds of video. That gives them a snapshot of what they're looking at, what the incident, how it's evolving. I'll stop it, and then I'll say, all right, identify, comprehend, predict. And perception is reality. Everybody's perception may be different, but at the end of the day, it's reality for me. So they answer them 3 questions, make that decision, then I'll play it again to see, did their perception equal the reality of what actually happened. We'll go 30 more seconds down the road. Stop it. Same thing again. Identify, comprehend, and predict. And make them practice going through that. And what you were talking about, developing that profile in your mind, having to make decisions, having to build them slide trays. You know what? You may not even think about it a year down the road, but as you continuously do that type of practicing and decision making and training, they develop slide trays in your brain for you to pull from, even though you don't remember exactly where you got it from or where you learned it at. So that's a great point, Mike. We are getting down to just a few minutes left. We'll do a little quick wrap up. But then if you have any questions, please type them in. We'll answer as many as we possibly can. Again, thank everybody for coming in and joining us. I hope you got something from it. There's if you type in developing tactical decision games, fire engineering, I believe it was July of 2016. The article I put the article together for them. If you got to log in for fire engineering, you should be able to get it. It goes through the 5 different types, all the way from that 1-page lesson plan to using a simulation software to help people make decisions. So you got it there. If you go to FDIC, we've been lucky enough to present the workshop out there twice. So look for it this coming year if I'm lucky enough to get selected again, which is always an honor of the FDIC. Mike, anything in closing?
Well, thanks for letting me be on here on the show with you guys. I hope it was a useful bit of information. Again, some of the books that we referred to is The Talent Code, Peak by Anders Ericsson, The Power of Intuition, The Sources of Power. Are there any other books that we kind of the work that we mentioned, Brian?
Well, the latest one that Gary Klein came out with was Streetlights and Shadows. I think we came out after The Power of Intuition. So any of them are going to open your mind to start looking at something else. Because that's basically what it sounds like happened to you, Mike, what happened to me. You started reading one thing, and all of a sudden it led to something else and going down a different route and an avenue. And even another one is looking at the Marines' doctrine of warfighting and looking at how they actually ask their field commanders or the company officers to make decisions using the commander's intent. They give you an objective. Here's your parameters. Here's the final outcome that we need it to be. Go out and handle it. So that's actually a good one to go and review and just to see how they frame up some of their information. Mike, thank you for joining us, taking time out to be a part of this.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate getting together with you out in Tulsa. By the way, that's a very awesome conference. If you're out in the Oklahoma area, there's no reason for you to not be there because it is free. And if I'm not mistaken, it was even free for out-of-staters. So look up Tulsa State Fire School. It's in May. And it's part of the Oklahoma State Firefighters Association. So make sure you check that out. And if you're not an International Society of Fire Service Instructors member, you need to join. If there's one organization that has done more for me, it is that one organization. So the reason I'm here today with Mike and the society, it's a member-driven organization. Throw your name in the hat, and they'll call on you. So I encourage you to be a member of that and help out, and be a part of the fire service. And hopefully you can bring stuff back to your local stations and departments and make a difference. Let's see if we got any questions coming up. Looks like we're good on questions, unless anybody's got anything at last minute. But like Jamie said, it's been recorded. It'll be on the website, and you'll be able to go out and watch it if there's anything that you needed or you didn't remember. So again, thank everybody. To all of y'all for joining us, and Mike, we'll hang around for another 2 or 3 minutes. If there's any questions that pop up, we'll answer them. But other than that, hey, everybody be safe. Have a good day.
Thanks for having us, guys. Brian, did you say that was anyconverter.com?